Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Gregory, and I am going to provide a quick video on how we logically and in a good organization identify the gap or problem space for your study. Most of the time when I speak to learners and I ask them to describe to me what their topic is about, the first two words that I usually hear is, I want. I want to study X, which might be a fine topic to study, but we don't use an I want when we are identifying the problem space. The problem doesn't come from our head or our heart. Sometimes it can start with experience or career observations. But the problem space comes from the literature. It comes from the previous scholars. We rely on the scholars to help show us through the literature what we know about a topic so that we don't try to research topics that have already been done, but also where we may potentially extend or expand their research to fill an area that may have little research behind it, that may have mixed conclusions, that may introduce an idea of adding a different construct or variable. So instead of the I want, we have to look to the scholars that indicate what additional research we should be looking at. Now, when we do that, we have to keep in mind two very important terms. A study has to be both viable and feasible. Viable is that you can complete it within the GCU time requirements. So you have to keep the topic very narrowly focused so that you can get done on time. And second, it has to be feasible, that it is a study that can be accomplished by a learner scholar. I had a learner approach me on a leadership study. And what the research was telling this learner was that when the top 100 Fortune 500 leaders were surveyed, the results found that the best leadership style at that given point in time was a transformational leadership style. And the author said, that's fine. We agree with that. However, they said, we did not know whether or not maybe the top 5 or 10 top Fortune 100 companies were representative of that decision, or maybe they were anomalies. Maybe they had a different style that was just homogeneously combined into the totals. So they said it would be a good idea to find out from those whether or not they held to that same viewpoint. Great study idea. However, it's not a feasible study because there's no way that a learner scholar would be able to access that caliber of leader, the Jeff Bezos, the Warren Buffetts of these companies, in order to ask them those questions. So whenever you see something that the scholars are recommending for further research, you have two questions to ask yourself. One, can I complete it within the GCU time requirements? And two, is this something that I can realistically perform as a learner scholar? If the answer to either one of those is I'm not sure or no, reach out and ask, but most likely it's going to be that's not a topic that you can do your study on. So when I am processing the idea of going from the literature of your topical area down to the gap or the problem statement. I try to do something visual, and my favorite visual is to look at this like a big plot of land. So, say your area of specialization in education is K through 12. Your plot of land is K through 12 studies. In this example, I'm going to use the idea of strategy and innovation as the big plot of land. And when we look at a big plot of land, a farm, there's going to be a lot of buildings on that farmland that represent different areas of study in your specialization. So we start out with the big plot of land, strategy and innovation, and we start looking into the literature as what is being written currently about that topical area. What we find is under strategy and innovation, there are different topical areas within that specialization. For example, in this scenario, we have three. We picked three: innovation diffusion, open innovation, and disruptive innovation. They're viable threads or streams of literature within strategy and innovation. So as you look at your farm, find out what the buildings represent in the different topical areas within your specialization. Pick 2 or 3 so that you have some areas of research to go into. Now, in this example, we decided that we wanted to study open innovation under strategy and innovation. So we set everything else aside and we pick open innovation. And I'm using this as a representation of the barn on the farm. So within the farm of strategy and innovation, we're going to look at the barn, and the barn is represented by open innovation. And we're going to start looking at the literature only within that area. Now, this is where sometimes learners can get a little off track because there might be a lot of topics out there. So you have to be very disciplined and narrow your focus and only look at literature that represents that specific area. Now, because it's a barn, we have to open the barn doors and see, I again say visually, what is in the barn. In other words, the barn of open innovation reveals to us more literature which was written about that topic. And I use the barn because when you open the door to the barn, you're going to see a lot of critters. There's going to be chickens and ducks and maybe sheep and goats, but I picked out 3 of my favorite critters: the cow, the pig, and the horse. And each one of those animals is going to represent some subtopic of open innovation. And when we research the literature, we see that open innovation could be represented through literature of firm-centric knowledge sharing. How do we share knowledge within the firm? The pig represents literature surrounding knowledge sharing between firms. How do we share knowledge between firms in open innovation? The third is the horse, and that represents scholarly articles about individual attributes of employees that leads to open innovation. There are lots more threads, but I only picked 3 because these are the most exciting that I want to see. So once you have your 3 pieces of literature or 3 areas of literature, pick one of these critters and take it out of the barn. Now, the important thing is to shut the barn door behind you. You don't want to get distracted and look at other areas of open innovation. You only want to look at the one. And the one we've chosen, or the one I chose, is the horse, which is our theme. So in this example, we opened the barn doors. We found all of these animals running around, which represents different threads of literature. We chose one and we took it out and closed the barn door. Now we want the details about what has been written on the chosen thread of individual attributes of employees. So again, you're only going to research down to that specific silo of literature and tell us about this literature. And to put it in another way, we know that horses come in different breeds, different colors, different genders. And so think of the different types of horses as different types of studies about employees, the individual attributes of employees, and open innovation. We know that there could be gender studies, there could be generational studies, there could be industry-specific studies, and there could be decision-making and implementation studies. All of those other horses represent what we know about individual attributes of employees in open innovation. We go down to this level so that we can understand and begin to determine what we know about that topic and what we do not yet know, which might be a missing horse that we need to study. Let's go back to the beginning. One of the things I said at the beginning of this video was that learners often start their discussion with me of their topic as, I want. I want to study X. In other words, they've already bought the horse, and now they're trying to fit that horse into a study. Or they've bought the horse, and now they need to find out where they're going to keep the horse housed. And there could be a danger to that. You need to start with the farm and the barn first to determine what the scholars have written about your topic. Because if we start out with the horse and we try to work backwards, we're setting ourselves up for potential challenges. So what if you get your heart and mind set on a topic and you try to backfill it with literature? That's kind of like buying a horse and looking for a place to put it. What if there's no more room in the barn for that horse? Either that area is saturated, we've got enough horses in our barn, or the scholars have determined that there's no further reason for us to study the horse. Now you're left with nothing. So don't buy the horse and then go looking for the barn. Look in the barn first and see what's in the barn and if there is room for a horse. To summarize, we want to ask ourselves the following questions, and these questions start drilling further and further down until what we know and what we do not know. So if I were doing a strategy and innovation research topic, I would say, well, what is the first thing we know about strategy and innovation? Well, we know there are lots of topics under it, so we have to look at what topics are being discussed and pick one. So what do we know about strategy and innovation? And what do we know about the threads of literature within strategy and innovation? In this example, we picked one, open innovation. So we pick one thread and we dive deeper. What do we know from the literature about open innovation? And within open innovation, we find out that there's these studies about the individual attributes of employees. So we want to dive deeper. Well, what do we know in the literature over the last 3 to 5 years about open innovation and individual attributes of employees? And that represents all those little horses. We will find out how it has been studied. And then looking at either areas of further research or areas that may be limitations of research. What do we know from the literature? And what do we not yet know that leads us to our gap or our problem space? I hope this has been an interesting little video for you. And it helps you to start to strategize by putting your specialization, your topical areas, your sub themes and topics from your area to develop your proposed study.